Hey everyone, Tin Man here, and Dota Underlords has just released a very late night patch called To Your Health, and I'm not so sure about that because if it was really to my health, I should probably be sleeping right now, but instead I'm up recording a patch note video because I love you guys and we got to make the patch note review as soon as it comes out. So, alright, so general changes. This is a pretty small section here. The most important thing, in my opinion, is they fixed an issue with Batrider's voice line. Apparently it was referring to the bat as the wrong gender. It was referring to it as a guy when it should have been a girl. Whole big kerfuffle on Reddit, and I'm glad we got that all sorted out. Underlord changes. Here we actually have Jull being somewhat reworked. He got a pretty massive HP buff at every level. Went from being by far the lowest HP Underlord, which didn't really make much sense for a tanky Underlord, to now having by far the most HP compared to other Underlords at 2100 at its baseline level. Also has some magic resist built in, so he won't just evaporate against opposing magic damage compositions. And the aggressive tank version, let's see, fixed Barrels of Fun. Oh, there's apparently an issue with Barrels of Fun was giving enemies damage resistance rather than taking increased damage. Well, that would obviously be a big problem for him. No wonder Jull always felt so bad. Anyway, so his aggressive tank, his slow burn effect has been replaced with a roundhouse. Jull gains 70% damage reduction, 200 attack speed, and 50% life steal for 5 seconds. So he's going to hit super hard, take very little damage, and gain a lot of health back by just kicking you around with his roundhouse. The healing tank version of Jull here replaces Righteous Healing with a To Your Health toast, where he once again gains the 70% damage reduction for 5 seconds, and allies are healed for 200% of the damage, adjacent allies are healed for 200% of the damage that Jull takes during this time. Now, of course, that is going to be massively reduced damage taken, so that's why this is such a high percentage, so it won't just be like rocketing your guys right back up to full health. I'd imagine this should be balanced roughly around the healing that he should have had before. Overall, this is a rather large change to Jull, and I really think it's a net positive because it doesn't say anything about changing his baseline passive, so he should still gain lots of bonus armor for adjacent enemies. He doesn't have as much built-in healing or built-in sustain, but he has a lot higher initial HP pool, so he's almost certainly going to get to cast these abilities at least once. One of the biggest problems with Jull was that he just wouldn't cast his ability, or be such a slow cast that the opponent would burn through his relatively small health total by the time that he got to casting it. Plus the magic resist should also help against any kind of stray magic damage. Overall, without testing these out, I don't know exactly where the power level lies, but I definitely think it'll be above where it was before. Both these versions of Jull sound a lot better than before, at least a lot more consistent. You know what they're going to do, whereas the previous ones felt very... I don't know if they were bugged, but they felt buggy, where it's like, I feel like this should be doing a whole lot more, and then nothing happens. Or, I feel like this should be doing a lot. I felt like this shouldn't be doing anything, and he was just unkillable. And it was really weird, and hopefully this kind of smooths him out. Of course, we'll have to play with it to really understand exactly all these changes. But my gut instinct is that Jull is much more powerful than before. Okay, on to the hero changes. Alchemist has been nerfed by 1 armor across the board on his armor reduction from the acid spray. This is actually a change that I had thought about when I was streaming earlier today was, yeah, Alchemist is definitely like a consensus, like, I don't know, top 3 unit in the game. Just slot him into like every composition all the time. He does so much. And so to see a little bit of a damage or an armor reduction on his acid spray get taken down a notch is a pretty good change. I still think you pick up Alchemist in a lot of cases. This just kind of brings him a bit more in line. You will see a little bit less damage output from him, but I would still include him in a lot of the same cases that you would include him before. This doesn't kill the unit by any means. Crystal Maiden, the Frostbite ability has been slightly buffed at 2 and 3 star. And the duration, the damage has increased per second, but also the duration has increased at every level. So this should make her more appealing at every step along the way. Still probably, since she's not an AoE mage, not a Storm Spirit, Morphling, Razor, she still probably isn't a top tier mage, but still this should be a nice little bump and maybe encourage you to play her just a little bit earlier than you probably would before. Dragon Knight, another one of the top 3 units in the game. Before this patch, I would have said Dragon Knight, Alchemist, and Treant Protector were definitely the top 3 units, and all 3 of them got a little bit of a nerf here. Dragon Knight just has his maximum health reduced by 100 at base level 200 at 2-star, and of course 400 at maximum level. So just make him a little bit easier to kill. He still has a massive damage output, still has a really effective Breath of Fire ability. This makes him a little bit weaker to assassins, I suppose, who actually just got a nerf just down here. So those are the ones who are going to be jumping on him right away. In most cases, though, I don't see this really manifesting as like a huge detriment to his power, other than against assassins who have a bit easier time taking him down. Otherwise, if your opponents are attacking your Dragonet, you're probably losing if they're not playing an assassin comp. Okay, so the two spirits, Earth Spirit and Ember Spirit, have swapped tiers, and this is an amazing change because Ember Spirit was another great unit, a little bit overpowered. They nerfed him last patch. Apparently it still wasn't enough. Assassins were still very strong, and they decided to bump him up to tier 3 and bump Earth Spirit, who was my vote for the worst unit in the game, bump him down to tier 2. Still think Earth Spirit's a really bad unit. He doesn't offer a whole lot. He offers a little bit of tankiness in Warriors, but really that's it. Doesn't offer a very good secondary alliance. Spirits are still not very strong, and so I'm not thrilled about Earth Spirit being in tier 2, but it's a step in the right direction, I suppose. Some people I've talked to have said that even if Earth Spirit was tier 1, he'd still be a pretty bad unit. So don't have really high hopes for this, but I'm curious to see where this all plays out. But Ember Spirit being moved to tier 3 is a huge nerf to assassins. The assassin build really relied on getting a 2-star Ember Spirit as soon as possible, and that was a really big early game power spike, and could pair with so many good early game items rather, such as Desolator or Orb of Venom even, but especially Battle Fury. Were so good at Ember Spirit when you got him up to 2-star right away. Now that power spike's gonna come a little bit later, and it's gonna be a lot harder, or at least more expensive, to get him up to tier 3, to 3-star rather. Maybe not actually harder, because the odds for tier 3 units do stay high a little bit longer than the tier 2 odds stay high. So maybe this allows you to get a little bit more Ember Spirits to 3-star, but of course it'll be a lot more expensive. So on the whole, this is obviously a nerf to Ember Spirit and to assassins on the whole. But there's that little silver lining that maybe if you're going for Ember Spirit 3-star later in the game, it might be a bit more accessible with slightly higher unit odds now that he's tier 3. Morphling, waveform has been adjusted a little bit. It has been substantially nerfed at 3-star, which was good because it was always kind of this ridiculous, like, oh, I'm going to like triple in power level at 3-star, whereas normally like abilities don't even double in power level. This like tripled, I mean, roughly speaking. And now it's been brought down to slightly less than double. That is a huge nerf at 3-star, and also the cooldown has been increased. The cooldown rather has been stabilized. It's always 6-second cooldown. It no longer scales from 8 to 6 to 4. So this is an ever so slight buff to Morphling at 1-star, and a rather dramatic nerf to him at 3-star. So if I'm playing a Morphling in a Mage composition, I am not looking to 3-star him at all. Kind of like Clockwork after the last nerf, where Clockwork got gutted at 3-star. I am not looking at all for Morphling to 3-star. Really want to be playing Mages in a way where you just build up a lot of 2-star units and be leveling up. Get Keeper of Light 2 and level up as much as you can to try to get Lich 2-star rather than going for Morphling 3-star anymore. Omni Knight got a slight nerf, actually, so this is a little surprising. I had always thought Omni Knight was probably one of the stronger knights with his healing and his relatively low cooldown, but he just never really fit in, so I guess they thought that Omni Knight was a little too strong just on his own, and decided to take his HP down by about 100 at 1-star and 200 at 2-star and so on. I kind of disagree with this. We'll have to see where knights end up in the meta after this, but I always thought Omni Knight was kind of like the powerful knight that you want to build around, especially get him up 2-star and then he's a big force for your team. But this nerf kind of brings him maybe a bit more in line, and he's not really that special anymore. Meanwhile, they buffed Razor here. Razor, the minimum damage has been increased of his plasma field from 25 up to 40, and the maximum damage has been increased at 1-star. I guess it's been stabilized at 2-star and slightly nerf. Okay, never mind. It's actually a nerf. I saw the first number. I'm like, oh, this is a buff, but no, it's actually. I think this is a net nerf here, because at 1-star it gets slightly better, but at 2-star. I guess 2-star it is still slightly better as well, because the minimum damage is slightly higher, but the maximum is the same. And at 3-star it's been nerfed slightly. So I This is a weird one to parse, actually, because in the early game, it's definitely a stronger unit now, but ever so slightly, and it was already a pretty good unit in the early game, but it was so good because it would allow you to transition into potentially 3-star Razor, which could help carry your Mage composition, and that's a little bit less carry potential now, up to 3-star, so maybe this is going the same way of Morphling, where Mages are not supposed to be hyper re-rolling and trying to get 3-star Razor, Morphling, Storm Spirit right away. Instead, they should be focusing on leveling up and try to get a 2-star Keeper of Light and a 2-star Lich as soon as possible, rather than trying to reroll for 3 stars. That might be the better way to be playing Mages nowadays, but this is a slightly stronger version of Razor in the early game, so I'm actually going to put him pretty high on my priority list just on turn 1. If I just have a Razor, I'm going to be a little bit more inclined to take him with this buffed damage. Even just at 1 star, I feel like he's going to be quite a bit more powerful. And he already was pretty strong. He just didn't really build into very good builds. Shadow Shaman, the Voodoo Hex, will no longer hex the same target twice unless all other targets have already been hexed. So this is going to force him to kind of spread his debuff around and not continuously lock down a single target. I don't know if this is a nerf. It's kind of a nerf, but it feels just like a side grade. Like, it's not really an upgrade or a downgrade, just kind of like different now. Without really seeing this in action, I feel like his power level is going to still roughly be the same. I wouldn't move him down on priority list at all for this, especially because he's still a druid and he's still a 1-cost druid, which means it's very easy to get to 2-star, and then that means you get other druids up to 2-star very easily. So that's his main power, and he still hexes for the same duration on the same kind of cooldown. So I think this is just fine. This is kind of like a throwaway line that I don't really see the impact of this right now. Sniper, Assassinate has been nerfed. Cooldown has been increased from 10 to 12 seconds, and if no units are alive on the enemy side except the Underlord, Sniper will be able to cast Assassinate on the Underlord. After all, there are certain circumstances where it would not cast. So this whole second line is just kind of like a bug fix, really. And the cooldown increasing from 10 seconds to 12 seconds is the real nerf here. Sniper was very strong, and I don't think this really changes anything. Normally, he's just going to get his first Assassinate off in a lot of cases, and if he's getting a second one off, you're probably winning that fight anyway when it was at 10 seconds, and very rarely would the 12 seconds really matter. Sometimes, the bare end of fights, he'd try to get an Assassinate off right at the end, and this will be a nerf in those situations, but I don't think you really mark it off as, oh, Scrappies are dead now because of this. I think Scrappies and Hunters are still very much happy to have Sniper on the team. Storm Spirit has also been adjusted. The base damage has been increased at 1 and 2-star, but slightly nerfed at 3-star. And the extra damage per cell traveled has been increased at 1-star, held steady at 2-star, and slightly nerfed at 3. So this is kind of going in the same line as what we saw before with Morphling and Razor, is trying to take them down in power level at 3-star and try to encourage a more level up build for Mages rather than a heavy reroll for 3-star in Storm Spirit, Morphling, Razor. So just all things I said before about those Mage builds, that's going to carry over into Storm Spirit as well. Tiny received a small buff here, and just getting, ever so slightly more HP, 25 HP at 1-star. That's almost nothing other than to make it a nice rounder number. Attack damage has been ever so slightly increased, looks like by about 5 or 10, so about 7 damage increase at 1-star, from 62 up to 105. Yeah, okay. So somewhere in that range. Or sorry, that's not how the math works. It was a minimum 60 to 100, so it was 80 attack damage, and now it's between 65 and 110. Whatever the average of that is, that should be, 87.5? Alright, fair enough. So, yeah, about a 7 damage increase. Nothing huge, but it's good to see some warriors get a little bit of love, even if this seems pitifully small for what they really need to make them viable. What they do need to make them viable is make Treant, one of the big alternatives to playing warriors in the mid-game. Nerfed him pretty hard. This Leech Seed cooldown has been increased from 7 up to 10 seconds, and I was kind of hoping to see other nerfs on Treant. I was hoping for an HP nerf and a Leech Seed cooldown increase, And this is kind of like the minimum nerf that I think I would recommend. I do like the nerf, of course. I was just kind of thinking it should either go from 7 seconds to 10 or possibly to 12 even, because it's such a powerful ability. It deals a lot of damage, it heals a lot of health, and slows their attack and movement speed by 50%. So it also kind of heals health in the fact that they can't attack you so quickly. But before, when it was a 5-second duration on a 7-second cooldown, you had very little time to counterplay that. It was on you, and it's not coming off anytime soon. Or when it does, they get to reapply it right away. Now there's going to be a lot bigger window here for Treant to actually take damage in between those casts, and I think this definitely brings him down quite a bit. He's still going to be a high priority just because he's still a strong unit and can really dominate the early and mid game if you get him up to 2-star very quickly, thanks to another Druid. But hopefully he won't be like the undisputed best unit in the game anymore and won't kind of warp the game around him quite so much. We'll have to see how this all plays out though, but I definitely think this is a good nerf that kind of brings it down in power level a little bit more in line, but still probably a strong unit, just not like S+ tier anymore. Viper, another toxin, has been slightly nerfed at 2 and 3-star. Actually rather substantially, because these numbers are basically multiplied out over for the 5-second duration. I think that's fair. Viper was still a very, very good unit, even after it's the nerf to increase the duration or increase the cooldown of another toxin. Was still very strong. So I think once again this brings him more in line, and I think this probably puts a higher priority. If you're going to run dragons, you probably want to shift your priority slightly more towards Snapfire and Dragon Knight rather than Viper and Dragon Knight in the late game. I think Snapfire still holds a lot of power, especially for a 1-cost unit. And I think without running all the numbers on this, I would have to imagine that Snapfire probably gets a bit of a nod over Viper, because these nerfs do start to seem pretty substantial. Unless you're facing a Mage build, in which case Viper with the extra magic resistance is probably going to be advisable over Snapfire. Okay, on to some item changes here. Diffusal Blade was actually adding damage per hit. It just really wasn't very clear or like obvious that it was doing that. But now it actually does 30 damage per hit. It used to just do 20 damage per hit in addition to the mana burn effect. So that's a weird thing to not include initially, and like I'm surprised no one really caught that, because I certainly didn't know that it added damage, and I just rarely picked Diffusal Blade because it didn't seem very worth it. Now that it actually deals 30 damage per hit, maybe you put it a little bit more on like Hunters, for instance, because Hunters get the multi-shot, and that will mean more mana burned and more on-hit damage. Or anybody who has fast attack speed, this might be a bit more of an appealing item now. Horn of the Alpha fixed a bug. I've rarely seen anyone use Horn of the Alpha in the patch, just because the tier 5 items are so rare in standard mode at least, that this bug fix doesn't really affect anything. Mask of Madness, another bug fix, no functional change. Vladimir's Offering has been nerfed. The damage percentage increase was reduced from 10% down to 8%. A very small nerf. I still think Vladimir's Offering, even at tier 4, is still a very strong item. I pick it up in most cases. It was mainly for the armor and lifesteal, honestly, and just because it gave massive survivability to your entire team and a damage increase. 2% difference in damage increase is by no means going to drop this item at all in a tier list of items. I still think it's a very strong item. On to some alliance changes. The Heartless bonus has gotten slightly buffed by one armor shred at each level here. 3, 8, 15 has been increased to 4, 9, 16. I always thought a Heartless was kind of creeping back into viability. Like, I hadn't seen too many dedicated Heartless builds, but like I've tried it to not horrible success. That being said, it's still not quite where it was at before, when it was like really dominant in the meta was like 5, 10, 20. But honestly, 4 Heartless is quite a bit more appealing at 9 armor than it was at 8. So I would definitely consider trying out some Heartless builds to see exactly where its power level lies right now. Hunters, the extra shot chance has been slightly increased from 25 at 3 Hunters up to 30, and from 35 up to 38. That's a really odd number, but I guess they didn't really want to put it all the way up to 40. That being said, Hunters are kind of on the verge of viability, I think, and this might put them over the top. This early game buff, 5%, it doesn't seem like much, but a 5% buff is pretty substantial on your most important damage dealers. And I would not be surprised if we start seeing more Hunters and Heartless. It's good combo together, to combo Hunters and Heartless into a stronger build in the early game. And then once you can get up to 6 Hunters in late game, they should be very potent. Especially with one of their biggest predators, the Assassins, being nerfed with the Ember Spirit nerf. Insects, basically a bug fix. Not really intended, but they fixed a bug. I really wish they had just said fixed an insect where spiderlings. Sorry, it's late. You gotta let me have these ones. Anyway, Knight, the damage reduction change has been buffed. Okay. Sorry, these numbers are weird. Okay, so basically Knights used to give 15, 20, 25% reduction. Now it's 15, 22, 28. And then multiplied by 2 when they're adjacent to another knight. So slight buff to knights. I definitely was advocating for a buff to knights last patch, and this is smaller than I had really hoped, I guess. 2%, I guess 4%. When you pair this with the Omni Knight nerf, I'm not really positive that knights are overall better. Like a dedicated knight strategy, a 4 or 6 knight strategy, I'm not convinced they're necessarily a lot stronger than they were before. But, it's something. So we'll have to see how it all plays out. But not optimistic about knights being a force in the meta after this change. Mages, 3 mages has been buffed substantially. Now this is like a buff I can get behind, right? Like if you want to buff a strategy, you give them like a fat 10% bonus, not a 2% change. And so mages were already more viable than knights, and seeing them buffed it at 3 mages is interesting, especially when I guess they did kind of nerf a lot of the mages at 3-star, so this is kind of encouraging you once again to play the 2-star mages in the early game and then try to transition up to 7 or to 6 mages as soon as possible to get that 75% increase. But it should give them a little bit smoother of an early game that they don't need to rely on hyper rerolling in order to survive the early game, because they'll have 35% magic damage increase. And this also makes them better against scaled compared to before, where scaled when both mages and scaled were nerfed in the same patch to kind of keep their balance of power. Now mages are kind of edging up and they're a little bit stronger than they were before. So I think mages are going to be a much more interesting build that should be a bit more common after this buff. And finally, last and still probably least, Spirit bonus has been slightly increased from 200 damage per slam to 225. So if you do a full Delta slam, that does 75 more damage. That is not a lot, especially with how inconsistent the slam is and how bad some of the spirit units like Earth Spirit still are, and Void Spirit to an extent, and just the inconsistency of not hitting anybody with your Delta slam. I'm not optimistic that spirits are going to be very popular in the meta. Kind of the same with knights, but probably even less so. Wow, that was a lot. That was a big patch to be dropped this late at night. The biggest thing right now, I think, is the Jull update. The Jull being reworked. I'll have to definitely be trying him out to see exactly his power level, but he does seem quite a bit better and quite a bit less buggy, I hope, and actually has like something that you understand how it's working. We'll have to see if that is actually the case, but compared to the previous one where I couldn't wrap my head around it a lot of times because it just didn't seem to be working. That's a good change, and I mostly approve of these balance changes. I think most of them are really good kind of small adjustments to some of the top performing units, and of course mages will no longer really be a hyper reroll mage build. They're going to be a level up mage build, but also slight buffs to Hunters and Heartless might make that build come back, although I still think it might be slightly on the fringes of the meta. Depends on how big of a nerf that this is to Treant, who is kind of a big one, kind of hampering those other strategies in the early and mid game. So thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this, and so I'll see you next time.